Welcome to episode 11 of Why Not Read Alpha Flight with Chris and Tom, a podcast where we take your favorite series seriously. I'm Chris Baker.
And I'm Tom Flynn. We're going from the beginning and looking at what made Canada's premier superhero team work, what didn't work, and taking a romp through a lesser read but much loved corner of the 616. Thanks for joining us today. We're glad to have you, and we hope you're glad to hear us. And if you're not, I don't know why you're listening. We humbly ask...
people hate listen too, buddy.
Oh, yeah. Man, that's the audience I want. We humbly ask that if you are glad to hear us, or if you hate hearing us, please give us a quick rating on your podcast provider. That kind of feedback really helps other fans find us through the magic of the algorithm. And Alphans, are we really calling ourselves and our listeners that?
Yes.
Jesus. Anyway, Alphans help Alphans, and Goonies never say die.
I love making you run. Every time Tom sits down to the script, he wonders if this is the time that he's going to find himself saying, "Go fuck yourself, San Diego."
It's going to happen at some point.
We want to take a quick moment to acknowledge the passing of Alpha Flight artist John Cassaday. His work on the 1998 X-Men and Alpha Flight, it's X-Men / Alpha Flight limited series, it was great. I loved it. I think that his art was a wonderful addition to the team's lore.
Yeah, I first came across him through Planetary, which he co-created with Warren Ellis. That might almost be a fun season unto itself, or mini season, focusing on a weird take on comics where the Fantastic Four are the arch villains across the entire story. But his art had such like striking lines, such clean colors. The close-up faces it wasn't like a photorealistic Alex Ross style. It almost suggested something vaguely computerish, but you could tell that there was a human like making it. There was heart behind it. Yeah, he made some absolutely gorgeous comics, and it's sad to hear of his passing.
Well, that computer aspect that you mentioned in 1998, that's about the time. Yeah, I know that he's doing stuff before and after this, but I'm just putting him here at the late 90s and into the aughts. That's when the computer coloring came into play. Mm-hmm. And boy, I was not a fan of computer coloring even at the time. And it's still jarring to move from the warmth of the pulp paper from the 70s and 80s and the old-fashioned techniques into the glossy paper with the computer techniques of the late 90s. Drives me nuts. But I felt like his line work was more substantial than like a Jim Lee line work, and coming out of that era of the incredibly fine and delicate lines to add all that detail, and then to come into this without it being a downgrade in terms of realism. And it was a really neat art trick. I think I first got to know him on Astonishing X-Men because I kind of took off the earliest of the aughts because we were in college and I didn't have money for books. So John Cassaday, thank you for your art. We appreciate it. And now on to Alpha Flight. Still reeling from the shocking death of its team founder and leader, Alpha Flight begins to pick up the pieces. Let's get to it. Alpha Flight number 14, titled Biology Class. Cover date September 1984, created by John Byrne, colored by Andy Yankus, lettered by Michael Higgins, edited by Denny O'Neil and Jim Shooter as editor-in-chief.
The cover of this issue shows Heather Hudson, recent widow of team founder and leader James McDonald Hudson, aka JMH, aka Mac, being pulled under the water by a big purple tentacle while hirsute dwarf in a unitard, Puck, aka Eugene Judd, watches an alarm from dry land. Heather is wearing long yellow pants and a very pink bra and her glasses and nothing else. But it doesn't necessarily seem titillating or prurient, though I rather doubt that stopped certain teenagers from feeling a little something.
In 1984, it was this or the Sears catalog, Tom. Everything on the cover has sort of a green tinge to it from being shown from the underwater perspective. Andy Yankus and John Byrne are a great team. It's really fun watching two artists work together for a long time. I like seeing them and what they do.
The issue opens with a full-page pinup of Snowbird flying and an inset poem by Robert Service named The Spell of the Yukon. There's the land. Have you seen it? It's the cussedest land that I know, from the big dizzy mountains to the deep death-like valleys below. Some say God was tired when he made it. Some say it's a fine land to shun. Maybe, but there's some as would trade for no land on earth, and I'm one. Robert Service was known as the Bard of the Yukon. Born at the end of the 19th century, lived until 1956 or so. He was wildly popular and successful in his lifetime, especially for his writing on the Yukon. Born in, I believe, England, but emigrated to Canada, spent most of his youth traveling up and down the west coast of the continent, eventually finding his way as a poet and journalist. Interestingly, his poetry, while wildly popular, I mean, he got wealthy off of poetry. That doesn't happen. But his poetry was not held in very high esteem by the literary establishment, frequently referred to as doggerel, in fact, which is just a dick word to use in general because it's an SAT word that you're using to show how clever you are when you're putting someone else down, which makes you an asshole. I don't know. I like this poem, but and its inclusion here, and it's
I knew that you would want to be the one to read it into the air.
Yeah. I also think it's interesting that this poet who became so wildly popular for writing a poetry that really resonated with miners, with folks living on the frontier whose education levels may not be as high as some of the critics who are, shitting on his work. I kind of like that it's in a comic book, that it's being used as a reference point in a comic book. Like this is designed to be a popular medium. And as we've already discussed throughout this run, Byrne has addressed environmentalism. He's gotten into, maybe not as well as we would like, but he's gotten into mental health. So like there are all these things that are being kind of slid into this superhero story, kind of like Robert Service talking about the Yukon and appealing to people and creating this majesty
Hey, upper
in their
crust
heads.
people, we're going to talk about the Yukon today.
Yep.
I said we talk about the Yukon today. Well, it sounds like Mr. Service would really appreciate his poetry being used here for Snowbird. And the poetry that is specifically talking about the land in the Yukon really hammers home this recent revelation we've had that Snowbird, a.k.a. Naria, a.k.a. Anne Mackenzie, her power is tied to the physical land of Canada. This is where she belongs. She can be nowhere else. So Shaman reminds her / us that Naria was only born 6 years ago, and that despite resembling a fully grown woman, quote, there is a richness to life that you have not yet begun even to suspect. Do not deny yourself this fullness. End quote. And she flies off to consider his words. But, I didn't think about it till I sat down to write this, that this phrase can go a lot of ways. Like, this is a masterfully ambiguous handling, just like with Aurora's abuse and disappearances and North Star's youth. Nothing here for the Comics Code to censor, nor is it necessarily in the plot to lay out the detail. It's a grown-up way of telling stories that younger readers can enjoy.
Yeah, I mean, kind of like what I was just saying about, Service and comics as a medium, as a way of getting some of these thoughts across in a format that folks can digest. And it's also funny because we've referred to Michael as the dad of the team, and this is some serious like dad to teenager advice. Like, you're a smart kid, but you got a lot of experience that you still need to get under your belt to make use of it. Like, I mean, there's definitely the after school special feel to it. And some of those after school specials are really dark and about some messed up stuff. So it's interesting.
Well, Alpha Flight can get really dark and is about some messed up stuff too. So, there you go. But the way that the story here is something that we as adults read this story and we're like, oh, I think I'm picking up what you're throwing down, John Byrne. And a 12-year-old is reading a superhero story that's being told in an expressly soap opera pattern, particularly now that we're past the single character focus issues. The way that John Byrne is constructing the issues themselves is that there's never more than about 4 pages in the same scene. And then we cut to one of the other team members somewhere else doing something totally unrelated to this. And then, you have 5 different scenes running at the same time and you start interweaving them. You give more pages to the A plot and it really feels like a soap opera that you're watching, where you are watching what the A story is for this episode, and then they cut to scenes of these other people for the stuff that will be moved into the A plot as this A plot gets closed out. These issues of Alpha Flight that we're covering today specifically feel exactly like a soap opera episode to me. And I think that is cool. I think that is a way to tell a story with a lot of people and a lot of stuff going on and with no clear endpoint that makes a lot more sense than some ways that people structure superhero comics.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really smart point. And in terms of creating some sense of realism or connection, like, unless you live in the X mansion, you're not going to be around all these people all the time. So the idea of getting into their private lives, and as we've discussed, Alpha Flight comes together very, very rarely. So if you're going to if you're going to do a book, Alpha Flight, a comic about this team, it's going to be spending a lot of time with them doing their own things, dealing with their own issues, spread out across Canada.
Well, and saying that this is a book about the team, what's different between this and the Avengers is that the Avengers is about what the Avengers as a team does, and they ignore everything else. And Alpha Flight says, this is about the team, Alpha Flight. These are the people on the team. This is what they do. It's not just when they get together as a team because this is what they're doing. It's fundamentally different than how most superhero teams are handled at this time. Again, 40 years ago.
So before we move on, quick question. Favorite soap?
Oh, I can't say that I have a favorite one, but I have watched more Days of Our Lives that I would have chosen to if it was up to me.
Fair enough. I was a Dark Shadows kid.
Oh, you're one of those.
Makes so much sense. Like
it does.
Yep.
Everything's clicking into place. Like a tomb door shutting in place. So both heroes leave the scene. The narration shows a dark stain on the rock that Snowbird had leaned against, perhaps a mark of disapproval from the ancient gods that their youngest is embracing her humanity. So a nice little couple of pages here spinning this story forward.
We then move to Heather and Puck on the outskirts of Toronto at the Ontario Place, home of the world's largest curved cinema screen in 1984.
Woo!
Puck has brought her out for an afternoon of hanging out like adults.
Okay, setting the scene aside, all that stuff. What is going on with Heather's sweatshirt here, Tom? It has like a center red panel, and it has white sleeves and side panels and a red bottom band and pockets and just one white sleeve and the other is red. There's like obvious stitching. It looks like someone cut apart a red sweatshirt and a white sweatshirt and sewed them together. So I guess now that Heather is broke and unemployed, she's learning to bend and sew and make things from scratch. She's coming from hardy stock, I guess.
I mean, I think this is just another instance of you not getting fashion. And John Byrne absolutely.
It's called Fashion Sweaty. Look it up. So Heather's worried about the future. There's some really great soap opera here, but not enough to get into. A lot of words on this page, and they don't really say a whole lot. They just kind of get a feel for Heather and Judd being all melodramatic.
So many words. Like, it's like dating back to when we first started this podcast of, wow, that's a lot of exposition on the page.
It's a book. You sit down and you're taking half an hour and you're focusing and you're reading a few hundred words. You know, I mean, there's a lot going on here.
Yeah. Suddenly, a woman's scream pierces the air.
Ah! Oh, no. Oh, are we going to cut that?
Well, I'm leaving it in now. Heather and Puck rush to the small dock jutting into the lake to find a traumatized young woman saying, no, and staring in horror at the water. Something in the water grabbed her baby and pulled it under right in front of her. As Puck moves toward the water, Heather runs in and yells, Judd, stop! You know you can't swim worth spit, which is an amazing thing just to like throw out immediately, like worth spit. Strips off her shoes and Frankenstein's sweatshirt. Okay. That was his writing. I love the sweatshirt. I don't think it's a Frankenstein sweatshirt. I think it's great, and it works really well on Heather.
I would love to buy a sweatshirt like that.
You can.
I would love to buy a Guardian costume hoodie with like the flag thing and the red and the white. I think that'd be fantastic in a white hood. I just don't have like sewing skills. I can embroider, but I literally don't know how to use a sewing machine.
I mean, I can probably get that done for you. She then...
I love you too, Tom.
She then dives into the water.
You know, I do bet that Puck swims horribly. And I bet he dives even worse. So Heather made probably an accurate observation, and that is all we're going to say about that.
Heather dives to the bottom and clearly, like, down. And this is Lake Ontario. It's got to be freezing. I mean, it's just, it's a whole thing that she's doing. She finds the empty baby stroller and is then attacked by the tentacle from the cover. Puck pulls her to safety with her legs appearing to have been shredded by hundreds of razor blades. Ominous narration hints the monster of the deep is studying and growing. There's clearly an intelligence at play here. So, for those keeping score, that's one death and one failure. Take 2 drinks.
Does the death being of an infant modify this at all in one way or the other? I'm not even sure which way.
Yeah, I just take a small shot.
Oh my God. All right, I've recollected myself, as I'm certain the listeners have. An interlude few pages show us Aurora getting ready for the day and suddenly faces an enraged Jean-Marie in her bathroom mirror, and Aurora falls naked to the floor in a psychotic breakdown. This isn't even a B plot for now, it's a C plot that will simmer for a few issues, and we'll throw them in when they happen because I like how well they break up the tension and link all these issues together. It's a very 80s style of having so many plot hooks going that they end up building on each other in ways that bring meaning to these long ago stories. Like for the Marvel movies, the version of that is the way that like Endgame specifically threw back hooks to tie into Avengers Age of Ultron and Thor Dark World, which were not the most popular movies. But by reaching back in and making them matter more into the big story, it helps to redeem some of the clunkier aspects of those earlier stories. And in many ways, the 80s comic books did that a lot. I mean, that's what Chris Claremont did, right?
It also certainly it improves the pacing of the book, and also cuts down the need for some of like the long expository sections like what kicked off this issue. It has a dynamic feel to it, and it also allows if someone's favorite character is Aurora and she's gone for 3 issues, that's going to be kind of frustrating. So for her to pop back in, everyone except for, and we'll kind of touch on this, Walt and North Star makes an appearance in these 3 issues. It's interesting. It's not noticeable that North Star is absent because that's not shocking. That's kind of his deal. It's weird that Walt's not around because he's always around.
Yeah, I think I made it to the second issue of this episode before I was like, where the fuck is Walt? Like, we see Aurora in his apartment several times, and Walt is just like, I guess she did mention once that he had class early, so maybe he's just like teaching this week. I don't know. Anyway.
I am not going to attempt to make sense of secret agent superhero linebacker Dr. Walter Langowski's choices in life because I think we all know by now my feelings on most of those choices.
So apparently in Walt's bathroom, he has not only fluffy orange towels, but a shag carpet toilet cover as well. And the sight of Aurora huddled vulnerably on the floor, inches from what has to be an indescribable horror like that, is haunting. For a woman with many low moments, having a mentee bee next to a bacteria sponge that looks like her boyfriend's butt cheek is certainly one of them.
You want to hear my theory?
Oh, God, no.
I'm pretty sure that Walt transforms into Sasquatch, shaves it off, transforms back, and has himself a little bit of a quilting bee.
Yeah, that is certainly a thing that you have said, Tom. I did just see a clip of later Alpha Flight that comes like certainly after Volume 2. But for some reason, Puck was undercover and had a big red beard, the fake beard thing, and he was undercover with Sasquatch. And I did wonder, did they just cut Sasquatch hair and make him a fake beard from it for the undercover mission? Because it was colored the exact same color of orange.
They're not government funded anymore. They gotta make things work how they can. And you're telling me that Heather is not the frugal type? They'll be like, Walt, you know what day of the week it is.
All right, Walt, we're stuck in the Arctic. Here's what you're going to do. You're going to transform into Sasquatch. We're going to shave you down. You're going to transform back into Walt. We're going to knit all this stuff together and make some blankets. And then you go back into Sasquatch and we shave you down again.
Because your other choice, Walt, is we pull an Empire Strikes Back. And I don't really think you want us crawling up inside. Well, maybe he does. Hard to say.
Abort. I'm pushing the button. Later, Puck visits Heather, who is getting settled in the hospital. He thinks that her earlier heroism was her trying to die because she feels guilty for her husband Mac's death in issue number 12, which, reasonable. But he is clearly worried about his now suddenly single friend.
Why do you have to put it quite like that?
Man, Puck all but puts it like that, and he will put it like that soon.
Oh, dear. As the only mobile hero at the moment, Puck meets with a hilariously 1984 accurate police inspector, McMurray. He's all bald-headed with the fringe and mustache, cigar-smoking, wisecracking, seen-it-all police detective sitting on 16 murders, and I bet he's thrice divorced and has a bottle of rye in his desk drawer. Listeners, originally, Chris had bourbon written in there, but this is Canada, so it's rye.
I defer to you on that. So, listeners, if you've seen So I Married an Axe Murderer, if you remember Tony, the best friend, freaking out about his very nice police boss, this is the boss that he actually wanted. Enough said.
I will also just simply note that I'm pretty sure our listenership and viewership of So I Married an Axe Murderer is not a Venn diagram. It is simply a circle. So the only connection between the murders is that they are on the waterfront and the victim is mangled beyond comprehension, sometimes while alive. And by mangled, I mean clinically dissected with almost all of the cellular matter stripped off their bones. Yuck. Now, Puck knows what it's like to be nearly cut to death on a shoreline by a sea monster and puts a few puzzle pieces in place from Alpha Flight's experiences that the inspector isn't clear to know about and puts out the call to get to the bottom of this.
And presumably tell them about Heather. You'd think Puck would have had Michael teleport right over to help with her leg wounds, since Michael is king shit of Canada's medical fuck mountain.
But the only Alpha Flight member who answers the call is Marrina. Did it only go out to her? She is in Atlantis with Prince Namor, who is informing her he has chosen her to be his queen, just as the call comes into her brooch. For a change, she's wearing her brooch, so she hears it.
Hello everybody, Bob Barker here, reminding you to ship your superheroes. Good night. I love that bit.
Having received
the call,
she uses this opportunity to get out of Dodge, Atlantis, and run off to help her friends, leaving Namor in the lurch. He blows off his being a world leader and engaging in delicate diplomacy job to chase an alien fish lady he wants to make queen of the fish people who don't even look like or necessarily like him.
Yeah, I don't get how Namor's a good guy. I just don't get Namor. I'm going to have to chalk this up to, wouldn't the world be boring if we were all the same? But this right here leads directly into the 4-issue Submariner series in 1984 by John Byrne. So this is all just Byrne setting up for future sales that he is directly profiting from. I think we're going to have to cover those because I believe Marrina's involved. So, yay.
I love it when he tells me things while we're recording about the extra stuff I'm going to have to read.
Oh, it's so much, Tom. Like, I think I've pulled together over 600 issues that Alpha Flight is involved in. And we are like 30 in. So, 5% listeners, stick with us. We're going to get there. Marrina meets up with Puck. And while everyone else saw each other in New York when Mac was murdered, this is the first time these two have seen each other since the Master took her over and she almost killed Puck. That was when Marrina and Alpha Flight learned her true nature, that she is hatched from an alien egg from a race known as the Plodox, sent en masse 40,000 years ago to genetically bond with a local life form and take over the planet for the Plodox Empire. When the ship crashed on Earth, it released its load of hundreds of thousands of eggs prematurely. While most were destroyed over time, since Marrina's eggs survived, it seems logical that what we're dealing with is another hatched Plodox egg.
But one that wasn't bonded to a human life form as Marrina was. Puck says, if this is one of your race, Marrina, it doesn't know what it's supposed to be. She replies, and it's been conducting its own biology class, trying to find out. But that's not all, folks. There's one more ongoing plot to introduce. We cut to the outskirts of Calgary, Alberta at an archaeological dig. For all the boring archaeology in this, Byrne must have been an Indiana Jones fan. Where a young college student is helping to excavate the remains of the original Fort Calgary.
She unearths a skull and notes to herself, and a white man's skull at that. And I do not know enough about this to know whether or not you can look at a skull and tell what it looked like on the outside. So, we'll leave it there. The skull turns into a big ghostly apparition and yells, "Revenge!"
That's how you know it's a white man's skull.
The student realizes she will need the help of someone she hasn't spoken to in 15 years. Her father, Michael Two Youngman. For this is, in fact, Elizabeth Two Youngman, the estranged daughter of Alpha Flight's mystical master, Shaman.
Remember her? We saw her for like 4 pages, maybe, total, in the first half of Shaman's origin story.
I think 4 panels.
That's probably more accurate, yeah. Spread across like 2 pages, most likely. So she ran from him 15 years ago. She would be like 3 or 4 at that time.
Yeah, later on she says she was 4. So she was talking very well for a 4-year-old.
Well, I mean, what would you expect of Michael T. Youngman's daughter?
Okay. You know what? I'm going to totally give that one to you. You're absolutely right. She is phenomenal. We will get to know Elizabeth a lot over the next lots of issues. She's going to be a mainstay of Alpha Flight for a while. That brings us to Alpha Flight number 15, titled Blind Date. Cover date October 1984. Written and penciled by John Byrne. Colored by Andy Yankus. Lettered by Rick Parker. Edited by Denny O'Neil. And Jim Shooter as editor-in-chief. I think that's the same credits we had last time.
We open with Alpha Flight's bread and butter, soap opera. Opening in the bleak landscape of the Northwest Territories in the sparse bachelor pad of RCMP Sergeant Doug Thompson, last seen when Snowbird, aka fellow Mountie Ann McKenzie, escaped from her cell by bursting through the wall original X-Factor style. The fallout of which fell mostly on Doug as the officer who put her in the cell. He's in a heap of trouble at work because of her. I gotta say, kinda unfair. I mean, they put Ann McKenzie into a cell and then she rips through the wall.
How is this Doug's fault?
Like, clearly there's a lot going on that no one is really sure about. So why is Doug on leave for, it turns out that this other officer is some sort of superpowered being. Whoopsie. Anyway, Doug seems like a solid dude because when Ann McKenzie shows up at his door, he doesn't immediately throw her into handcuffs, asks her what happened, is kind of checking to see if she's all right. She's come to him because outside of Alpha Flight, she has no other friends. So she reveals to him that she is Snowbird and has divine heritage. And she's really coming kind of in a way to say goodbye and also just to like tie up a loose end. She feels like he should know what was going on here.
He deserves to know because he was important in her life as she learned how to be a human in her fake job out in the Northwest Territories.
It also fills in some gaps as to why she was having such issues with the new head of the post, that Guardian had set up this job, which we kind of knew, but the previous head of the post, the Mountie post, knew what was going on, knew that she had some connection to the government, that she would have to disappear every so often or without warning and wasn't a big deal. But that
She's Jane Bond. Yeah.
But that guy died unexpectedly. And for some reason, there was no way to let the new guy know what the deal was. So that's part of what caused all these issues and why there was this tension about her disappearing, what was going on with all that, and why there's now like a warrant out for her arrest.
I can no prize this. The reason that the new commander was not informed of this is that there is a memo. It's like a phone call slip that's at the bottom of JMH's desk back in Department H, and he is just not good at organization.
Having revealed herself to Doug, he then in turn reveals that, he's in love with her, which not shocking.
You know, the picture of what his place looks like, it's like a 1-bedroom house, I think, that is up on stilts, and it is in this incredibly bleak landscape. There's no trees. There's nothing. It's just 20 miles in every direction of nothing. So yeah, there's a pretty blonde girl at work. I can see where Doug could easily fall in love
with an air of mystery.
Ooh.
Plus, I love Doug's hairline.
Dude, there need to be more soft hairline fellows in superhero comics. We can't all look like insert whatever you want there. I'm going to leave that to the interested listener. Cut back to Toronto on the shore of Lake Ontario, where Puck and Marrina are going over the plan. While in Atlantis, Marrina got a slightly altered costume, and it's still a green swimsuit, but now has really neat flowy bits for sleeves. It's nice. I like it.
I don't.
Oh, really?
I don't get the point of it. Like, it doesn't really, I don't think they don't have to serve function or anything, but the way the sleeves kind of pull away from her arms, it just looks awkward. I don't know. Just a thing.
Hey, wouldn't the world be boring if we were all the same, right? So Marrina dives into the water in search of answers, eventually detecting a trail that leads into a cavern deep underneath the lake. Barely squeezing through a choke point, she realizes that if the monster is in here, it has to have a different bone structure than hers to pass through. She emerges into a natural grotto-like area with air inside, air in which she can detect the scent she has been following as an intoxicating lure into which she is falling.
Meanwhile, in Vancouver, Aurora has crawled off the bathroom floor, but is still wrapped in a fluffy orange towel on the edge of the bed. You know what I'm thinking?
No, I don't, Tom.
Orange fluffy towel. It's like it's like Walt's there with her. It's like Walt's there with her, comforting her. We have no indication how long...
God, you're right. Oh, it hurts. It hurts, Tom. Why are you right about this?
So there's no I mean, what does that smell like is the other question. Anyway,
Well, it's a towel, Tom. It smells like fabric softener. That's what it smells like. Although Walt is a bachelor, it probably smells like 6 weeks of showering and drying.
Yeah,
off
I don't see Aurora really cleaning things up a lot.
She don't cook and she don't clean.
We have no indication how long she's been sitting on the edge of the bed, but it's safe to say it's been a while.
Committed to reaffirming herself as the dominant persona over Jean-Marie, she pulls at her long, luxurious hair with one hand, and in the other holds a menacing pair of scissors.
Bet you Walt can put that hair to some good use.
What? Ew! God! Damn it, Tom! All right.
Another peek behind the curtain, folks. Chris writes the script. I go through and edit and block it out, so he doesn't always know what I've dropped in for later.
It's how he gets his revenge on me.
Very much so. Back in Toronto, Marrina emerges from the lake visibly changed into the monstrous form we saw in issue number 2 when she gutted Puck, and immediately she tries to do so again. Not one to make the same mistake twice, Puck dodges her first attack, slips off his jacket, and draws upon his training in Spain as a matador. While out of left field, it's pretty fantastic.
Oh, yeah. The narration says that the bullfighting teacher only accepted him as a student because the teacher knew what esteem the American writer had for Eugene Judd. Dude, Puck being friends with Ernest Hemingway is something I totally buy. I don't particularly like it, but it's a great shorthand to fill in some Puck history that we haven't been treated to.
I personally am not a huge Hemingway fan. He's fine. I mean, he's better than fine. I just don't especially seek out I've never really sought out his work. I will, however, say that his nonfiction book, The Dangerous Summer, detailing a summer in Spain following around matadors, that's pretty good. Like, that's actually an enjoyable read. It gives you a sense of the place. It's also the kind of thing that only Hemingway could have written because of who he was and the space he occupied. So if you're curious about, bullfighting Spain during that period and get a little taste of Hemingway, I would say read The Dangerous Summer, stick to Hemingway's shorter stuff. That's about it.
Well, it sounds like that is also the piece that is most directly relevant to Alpha Flight here. So there you go, Alphans. You've got the exact Hemingway that you need. Tom is shaking his head at me.
Yeah, I hate that term.
I know, that's why I use it. So before we finish this fight, we have one last interlude of Shaman in his medical practice on the Sarcee Reservation outside Calgary, Alberta. In the middle of a patient visit, Elizabeth very rudely bursts in on him. Before he could get all mushy, she informs him this is strictly a business call for Shaman. So she did say here that she was 4 when she saw him last, and it's been 15 years. So given his 10 years of solitude, aka Elizabeth's childhood, he became Shaman in 1979. So our extended discussion of timelines is vindicated, Tom.
He is so excited, folks. Like, giddy. As Puck realizes he can only dodge for so long, the lovesick Namor bursts from the water. Unaware of the Marrina's change, he tries to talk to her and is rewarded with her trying to claw his eyes out. Before Puck can re-intervene, a mysterious stranger in the classic fedora and trenchcoat disguise administers a Vulcan neck pinch and knocks him out. He quickly steps in while Namor is blinded and does the same to him. Anyone familiar with comics will not be surprised to learn this mysterious stranger is, in fact, the Master of the World, Alpha Flight's first recurring villain.
Okay, all right. Couple of things here. One, the Master's, he changes from his cliche disguise into his supervillain costume between panels, and it's not just a matter of throwing off the coat and hat. That helmet that the Master wears is big and bulky. He couldn't have had that under his coat. And then in the next issue, the helmet's going to be like really close to his head and sleek like Guardian's instead of bigger and bulkier like a Cerebro helmet. And two, when Puck and Namor are fighting with Marrina, it's sunny and clear skied, but as the Master enters the scene, it is raining and dark. So was the fight going on for a super long time, or does the trench coat and fedora come with like environmental mood altering abilities to set the scene?
If you were a supervillain, wouldn't you want something that would help you set the scene for your entrance? I would.
Okay, but I don't think that technology exists, because if it did, Dr. Doom would use it.
Maybe the Plodocs have it. Just saying.
And Doom just hasn't found it yet.
Look, You're going to quibble with what technology does or does not exist for a 40,000-year-old being who read a book. And finally, we have Alpha Flight number 16, and forsaking all others. Cover date November 1984, written penciled by John Byrne, finished by Bob Wiacek, colored by Andy Yankus, lettered by Rick Parker, edited by Denny O'Neil and Jim Shooter as the editor-in-chief. Quick note, the titles for all these issues have been spot on. Really well done. Really solid titles.
I can't say that I know for sure the technical difference between a finisher and an inker, because we have a finisher credited here instead of just art or created by John Byrne. It says he wrote and penciled it. So I think that the finisher does like extra background work on top of what the inker would normally do. This is the first time another artist other than Andy Yankus is involved in Alpha Flight proper, and it somewhat shows. Like the inking's a little softer, like a little bit more cartoony than Byrne has been doing for himself. I really like seeing an artist ink himself because it really shines through exactly what that penciler is trying to get into. I don't know, maybe I'm reading too much into the big goddamn fish submarine on the first page.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm totally a fan of this look. There's something not right about it.
Yeah, it's just a little off, you know?
That could just be familiarity, though. I mean, we have been reading the same team for so long that any change is going to be, especially in the art, is going to be that noticeable, but I don't know. Before we get into the issue proper, the cover shows Puck kicking the Master in the face while Namor breaks out of a confinement tube. It's, as we like to say, fine.
Yeah, we've been saying that about a lot of the covers lately. I feel like the more Byrne tries to do on the cover, the less I like it, and vice versa. And that kind of mirrors the story content as well. Those iconic covers that we liked in like 5, 6, 7, 8 were for much more focused solo stories. And these covers are for multiple characters, and you got to show who's in the issue, right? But like a lot of the people are interacting, so we're only getting Puck and Namor, who isn't even in this book, you know. And again, where the hell is Walt? I miss my buddy.
I don't. There's a lot of villain-splaining and posturing, so to remind you of the Master's deal, he was a humanish creature 40,000 years ago when the Poldock ship carrying Marrina's egg crashed to Earth. He was seized by the ship and dissected at every level possible and rebuilt as the perfect man. What we also learned, though, is that he was irrevocably bound up physically to the ship itself and could not leave. So he orchestrated Alpha Flight destroying the base around him. Hence, back in issue number 4, when he seemed excited as the explosion started and shouted, "It begins."
I told you to put a pin in that scene, listeners. Byrne pays off. Sometimes. The Master had used the ship's resources to construct this big goddamn fish submarine as his escape pod. And so as the everything blew up around him, he fell into the water, got into the ship, and tootled on away, apparently so fast that neither Namor nor Marrina could find him. It's better than the return story for Doom after his first death in Fantastic Four number 5, when they threw him out of a spaceship and he caught a ride on a passing comet and then came back in number 10 having been saved by and dominating an alien race. And that story is uncomfortably similar to how Mac will eventually come back to life.
That does not bode well.
I'd say you're in for a treat, but it's like the opposite of that. You're in for the family circus. You know, like every day you're reading the comics page, having fun, and you know that down at the bottom is family circus, and you know it's going to suck, and yet you know you're going to read it anyway. And that's Alpha Flight, and I love it.
We're really digging into what makes us us in this episode, I feel like.
Yeah, that joke is a reference to the movie Go, which if you haven't seen, you're probably a better person than me.
We should do one about Go. Anyway. The Master has Puck and Namor captive, along with both Marrina and the Monster of the Lake, in big tanks inside the submarine. The Master reveals the monster is not just an unformed Plodox, but indeed Marrina's broodmate. Ew.
Of all the hundreds of thousands of eggs that the spaceship jizzed all over Earth 40 millennia ago, those two crazy kids found each other. Really, this is so soap opera, it's a Hallmark movie at this point.
It's like the soap opera Hallmark Shudder version. It's got that sort of weird horror element to it.
No, it's if Hallmark made Alien.
Oh, that's really good. I like that. Yeah, so there's no romance here. The Master combines the tanks to let them share a single big tank and...
Smash! Cut to an interlude in Roger Box's house, in the totally real place of Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, where Roger is drafting mechanical plans in his cluttered home when he has an expected guest, one Mr. Madison Jeffries, in his first appearance. Mr. Jeffries is a white man of medium height wearing tight jeans. You know what? He looks like a shorter Brock Sampson from Venture Brothers, down to the belt buckle and cigarette. But instead of blonde, curly mullet, he has like blue, black, shaggy hair. Mr. Jeffries is noticeably rough and rugged looking and not what anyone would describe as attractive.
Roger has paid Jeffries 1,084 Canadian dollars, it's like $1.50, to come to his house and help him rebuild Box so he, Roger, can go murder the people who murdered Mac.
Roger Box has been described as a mechanic without equal, reminder that he created a large remote-controlled robot named Box, B-O-X, that has proven to be an incredibly powerful tool, powerful enough to beat Guardian to death.
Almost.
But almost to death, you're right. But Mr. Jeffries is also the last unnamed member of Gamma Flight, hinted at all the way back in issue number 1. If you go back and look at those little panels that showed us Beta and Gamma Flights, we can now hook up names and faces with each person that was in there. Jeffries is the last person to pick up on that plot hook that was laid out so long ago.
Jeffries is a mutant with the power to transmutate metal, glass, and plastic into new shapes. With Roger's designs and Jeffries' abilities, Box, B-O-X, is about to become a whole lot more than a remote control robot. You know, I might just start incorporating a little stinger when we say Box, the robot Box, to indicate it.
Robox?
Robox. No.
Well, it's Roger Box, and then that becomes Robox, too.
Maybe I'll just make it like sound very mechanical when we say Box. Box.
That would be a great way of doing it, adding like some type of mechanical filter so it sounds all computery. Box. That was for future Tom, not necessarily for listeners.
Oh, some of that's going to be in.
Yeah, just us saying Box. Mr. Jeffries is given some odd speech patterns, including calling JMH Guardian instead of Guardian. He's Guardian. And he says that he just works a shovel these days. So Jeffries is very much painted as a very, very blue-collar kind of guy, not the egghead kind of superhero, the kind who doesn't even understand what it is that his abilities can do. So this is the meeting of Roger Box and Jeffries. And you remember in Avengers 2, it's all about Avengers 2 today, guys, when Tony and Bruce went all Science Bros montage, that's Roger and Jeffries, but like all the time. They are just science bros like, hey, let's go build some shit. Here we go.
Back in Toronto, Heather is feeling some feelings in the middle of the night when her dear old friend, Logan, shows up in his Canadian cosplay outfit to feel some feelings with her. And that's a lot of innuendo for what's really just a scene of a friend checking up on a friend who's gone through something horrible. Though that friend did have to sneak into the country and violate a few treaties to do the checking. Details.
Back on the submarine, we get our first look at the monster, and it is an amorphous pile of black and green tentacles, but it's scary because of that amorphousness. Like, it's kind of like an eldritch horror is what it looks like to me.
It's really scary because it generates the face of the baby it ate in issue number 13, then opens its mouth to show huge fangs.
Unnecessarily horrific, Bird. Just is too much.
Hard disagree. I think this really nails Marrina's underlying alien nature and plays on the fierce horror of the sea. This isn't, like you said, eldritch. This is an old one's kind of creature, and its alienness is quite impressive.
So Puck escapes, releases Namor. Puck rips off the Master's helmet, uses it to break the tank glass, flooding the control room and exposing all of them to the monster and Marrina, who is clearly under the monster's spell of the Magic 5 use.
Little problem, though. Because the helmet was bonded to the Master's head, so Puck just ripped the skin off the top half of his face. And the Master can no longer control any aspect of the ship, and they're all going to die.
Yeah, and I love the way that he explains it to them. He's like, you damn idiots, god damn it, I can't do a goddamn thing around here anymore. How do you think this place is running? Huh? It's like taking a Gen Z's phone and throwing it away, you know? You just watch them rage. I can't do a goddamn thing around here without that. So, yeah, we saw the Master clearly without his helmet at the end of the last issue. So does it only bond to him, like, when he's using it? Like, when he puts it on, does it bond? And then there's a process by which it unbonds? I don't quite understand this because This detail seems poorly thought out.
I think you're missing one point, which is that this is actually kind of brought up by Namor, and the master says, you're an idiot. My suit lets me look like how I want to look so I can move around. So when we saw him with the fedora and trench coat going on, that was just a hologram or something. He is always walking around looking like the master of the world. He just decides whether or not people can see that or not, which...
Why does he call himself the master of the world? He's the master of this submarine. That's all he's got. He has never taken over any actual physical land. He had a spaceship that he found. He had some ice that was around it, and now he's got his big goddamn fish submarine. This is just the most grandiloquent, over-the-top, narcissistic naming thing that I can imagine for a villain. I want him to meet Dr. Doom, and Dr. Doom to just laugh at him and walk away. That's what I want.
I guess I'm more impressed you spent that much time complaining about delusions of grandeur from a supervillain.
Okay, all right.
Anyway.
I take my chastisement, Tom.
The hull of the sub ruptures and begins taking on water. The situation is rapidly destabilizing and the monster is closing in. Puck tells Namor that Marrina is both too far gone to help right now and able to breathe underwater, unlike himself. So, Namor throws Marrina out of the hull breach against the pressure of the incoming water, which Puck notes as, holy God, how strong is this guy? Grabs Puck and swims/flies him out of the water, where they see the explosion of the sub below them. It's kind of a neat, huge bubble that like explodes at the top of Lake Ontario. It's actually kind of a neat panel in that respect.
Yeah.
Namor searches the water for hours looking for the missing villains and his fish lady love to no avail. He tells Puck that Puck has earned Namor's respect that day and takes his leave, apparently to go off to his 4-issue miniseries.
Which is when Puck tells Marrina to come out from the rocks behind him because Puck knows that she's there. Seemingly back to her senses now that she's away from her broodmate. Marrina avoided Namor because she's going through some serious 19-year-old finding out yourself stuff. Unsure whether she is Marrina Smallwood with a family and loved ones or a monster intent on destruction, she wades into the water and away from Puck and Alpha Flight.
And interestingly towards Namor. Like, she's going into his domain, but thus we bring to a close another arc of Alpha Flight while opening up future arcs. What with Snowbird and what's going to happen there or not happen there. Aurora's situation, Shaman and his daughter, figuring out where the hell Walt has been this whole time. So again, the soap opera structure has allowed us to have an overarching, engaging superhero story that comes to a close while opening up other options to explore as the series moves along.
As this one comes to a close, other ones will come up to fill in the gap, and then we will have other things flowing in. I'm sure we'll be seeing Northstar and Walt very soon.
There's an element to this that very much emphasizes Mac's death, making it feel much more real and that they really are moving to a new status quo. I mean, the idea that Puck is the one that puts out the call, that in any sort of a team up situation to date, it's largely Ben Guardian that's been kind of orchestrating things. And now that's not there. But yeah, there's clearly a sense of what kind of a team is Alpha Flight moving forward, which also is covered in the last page of the comic, where it shows the full team without Guardian, with Heather in the middle and the top of it saying, what is the future of Alpha Flight or something along those lines. So they're really moving hard in the direction of what's next. How does this work? Is there an Alpha Flight moving forward?
Yeah, Alpha Flight is not really a book about the status quo being maintained. It's a book, at least as we're starting it here with John Byrne, that is much like Claremont wanted for his X-Men, a group of people that people will come to and join, and people will leave either from death or by choice. And it will not just keep reverting back to, well, this is our team and this is what sells our books. It really feels like the story of a group of people who do all know each other, but things change, and I'm really digging that. The first couple volumes will do this, but eventually the 06 status quo will be the mean to which Alpha Flight reverts to regularly as we get into the 21st century. And that brings us to this episode's featured patch from Excelsior Embroidery Company. But surprise, this time it isn't a patch, but embroidered towels. In honor of the impending spooky season, I've made some, dare I say, clever towels and wall hangers that are perfect for nerds looking to spook it up with class. I'm partial to the This Is Boo sheet and the Ghost Cats designs myself. In fact, Tom told me that his wife wanted a Ghost Cats on a sweatshirt. And my daughter just ordered matching Stay Spooky sweatshirts for her and her girlfriend. So things are hopping at the EEC these days. Check us out at excelsiorembroidery.etsy.com.
And that sweatshirt is, in theory, a surprise. But since she doesn't listen to this podcast, we can talk about it freely here.
You can find us on the web at www.thewhynotpod.com, as well as our main socials on Instagram, Tumblr, Reddit, and now Twitter. Ugh, the modern world is horrifying. You can also email us at whynotehpod@gmail.com. We're always happy to hear from you and to try to answer your Alpha Flight questions.
This episode of Why Not is recorded in Chicago, Illinois, and deep beneath stately Baker Manor in a fashionable neighborhood outside St. Louis, with cat noises, and there were a bunch of them this time, provided by a chonk named Teeny. It is produced by Tom Flynn with help from Chris Baker. New episodes available every other week on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. If you like what you hear, please rate and review us on your podcast provider. Those are really important to helping fellow fans find our show.
Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next time with a few guest appearances with Spider-Man and licensed He-Man knockoff toy property Crystar Crystal Warrior. And it's even more amazing than I just described it.
See you then.